Good evening. Hi. Thank you for being here. I am Dean Camille Carey, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here. This evening, we are honored to present the 5th U.S. Senator Dennis Chavez Memorial Lecture in Law and Civil Rights with Secretary of the Interior and UNM Law alumna Deb Haaland. This lecture is one of the capstone events during the law school's 75th anniversary, which we are celebrating this academic year. Our celebration would not be complete without including this prestigious lecture that brings together our legal and greater communities around important topics that are as relevant today as they were in Senator Chavez's lifetime. I am delighted to see our very special guests, the member of the Chavez and Tristani family and their friends. At this time, I ask that the members of the Chavez and Tristani families and their special guests stand to be recognized. We are grateful to see you here with us this evening. Thank you for being here. We remember those who played an integral role in establishing this lecture at the law school and who are no longer with us. We think of them fondly on this occasion, especially the Honorable Gerard Thompson, a 1973 graduate of the UNM School of Law, and Gloria Tristani Sr., who is Senator Chavez's daughter. It is now my pleasure to welcome Jorge Tristani to the stage. Mr. Tristani is the grandson of Senator Chavez. Mr. Tristani?
Almost panicked there for a second. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, Madam Secretary, UNM Law School Dean, and all of you in this wonderful audience. It is quite the honor for me to talk to you a little bit about my beloved grandfather, whom we fondly called Pop-Pop at this wonderful event. This late Senator Chavez, the first native-born American elected to the U.S. Senate, has been honored nationally and locally many times. A commemorative 35-cent stamp was issued in 1991. His portrait is now part of the collection of the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., one of the few Hispanics in that portrait gallery. Here in Albuquerque and nearby, 2 elementary schools, a boulevard, a community center, and the downtown federal office building carry his name. Furthermore, his effigy is depicted in murals at the South Valley Economic Development Center on Isleta Boulevard and the Dome of the Torreon at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. Why so many honors, you may ask? Let me do a little bit of quoting from an article written by his granddaughter, Sissy Coy, who cannot be with us today. Chavez's life, my grandfather's life, was an American success story. Born in 1988 in an adobe house with a dirt floor in the village of Los Chavez in nearby Valencia County, in what was then the territory of New Mexico. Life for Hispanic people then was hard, marked with racial and economic prejudice. My grandfather spoke only Spanish till he was 8. He quit school early to help out his family, but never stopped learning. While working to support his family, he spent many evenings at the local libraries. This self-education enabled him to pass a special exam and entered Georgetown Law School. Pop-Pop earned his law degree from Georgetown in 1920 at the age of 32. His first elective office was as state legislator, where he introduced the first measure to provide free textbooks for all New Mexico school children. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 1930, and in 1935, he was appointed to the Senate after the death of Bronson Cutting. Chavez was reelected to the Senate in 40, 46, 52, 58, and he served there until his death on November 18, 1962. The late House Speaker, Jim Wright, from Texas, praised my grandfather this way shortly after he passed away. Truly, he was one of the great legislators of American history. As chairman of, as chairman of the Senate Committee on Public Works, as chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Defense Appropriations, many great things bear the fingerprints of this man of very humble origins. The 3 Air Force bases here and the 2 national labs in New Mexico are testament to that. The late Representative Albert Bustamante from Texas, then chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, said this about my grandfather. As the United States' first Hispanic senator, Dennis Chavez did more than just represent the people of New Mexico. He spoke for the concerns of all Hispanic Americans throughout the nation. He was a pioneer in Hispanic leadership and opened the doors for the dreams and aspirations of millions of Hispanics. For 3 decades, Senator Chavez was the federal government's most forceful advocate on behalf of Hispanics and Native Americans. His concern, however, was not limited to any single group. He used the powerful weapons of Congress to battle discriminations of all kinds through means such as federal aid to schools, improved public health facilities, and wider job opportunities. He waged a 20-year fight for a Fair Employment Practices Act, the FEPC, to eliminate racial discrimination in the workplace. As he forcefully argued, we are all free or we fail. Democracy must belong to all of us. History tells us that this important measure failed because of the opposition of the Southern Dixiecrats. But 20 years later, it became a powerful blueprint for the successful civil rights legislation of the 1960s. And let's not forget that my grandfather was one of the first to speak out and step against the dangerous demagoguery of Senator Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Dennis Chavez, along with Pueblo revolt leader Pope, is one of the 2 New Mexico native sons honored with a statue in Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol. The statue's inscription reads in English, Spanish, and Navajo, "We have lost our voice is gone forever." Ladies and gentlemen, in ending this introduction of my grandfather, I'd like to refer to another inscription. If you visit his gravesite at Mount Calvary Cemetery in Martineztown, the inscription that really strikes home to me is the following: "A friend to all, he championed the poor." This was so true. He really was a man of the people, no society errors, totally down to earth, and as humble as you can get. That was my grandfather. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tristani, for sharing that with us. It was wonderful. We know your grandfather did so much for the people of New Mexico and for the rest of our country, and we are grateful for the opportunity to honor him and celebrate his legacy. Now, it is my incredible honor to introduce U.S. Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. Secretary Haaland is a member of the Pueblo of Laguna and a 35th generation New Mexican. Secretary Haaland made history when she became the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. As a military child, she attended 13 public schools and in the end graduated from Highland High School in Albuquerque. Haaland earned her bachelor's degree in English from the University of New Mexico. She then matriculated at the UNM School of Law, where she earned her JD in 2006. After law school, Secretary Haaland became the first woman elected to the Laguna Development Corporation Board of Directors, overseeing business operations of the second largest tribal gaming enterprise in New Mexico. In 2015, she became the first Native American woman to be elected to lead a state party. And in 2019, she was elected as the U.S. representative for the 1st Congressional District, and in doing so became one of the first Native American women to serve in Congress. We are so proud that the Secretary is one of our own. Secretary, every day you are a role model of success and grace for our children, our students, and our communities. Please join me in welcoming United States Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being so kind. And thank you, Dean Carey. I'm so proud to be back in the forum, back at UNM School of Law. So many wonderful memories here. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dean Carey, and for your exemplary leadership. I also want to recognize my dear friend and mentor, Professor Carol Suzuki, who I met on my first day of PLSI, and I've known her ever since, and just so grateful for, it's good to have somebody who knows you and cares about you and tries to lead you in the right direction. And I guess she's done a good job, right? So thank you. Thank you. I acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Tiwa people. Guatsi Haupa, Duhiname, Itzatuitsa, Shuimi Hanu. I am so pleased to be back here at UNM School of Law, a place where I spent many hours as a student and a member of the Pre-Law Summer Institute and as a TA at PLSI after my first year of law school. I will see PLSI students tomorrow evening, so it really feels like coming home. When I was invited to do this lecture, my first reaction was, yikes, I have nothing to offer legal professionals who would come to this lecture for actual credit. Right? But then Keish helped me to realize that the late Senator Dennis Chavez and myself have much in common. And when I see a photo of him, I do feel a kinship. I know Senator Chavez defined his roots here as being here in New Mexico before our country was the United States. And I define my roots similarly. When I did the math, if my ancestors migrated to the Rio Grande Valley in the late 1200s, that would make me a 35th generation New Mexican. And that has become a proud part of my biography. The year that Senator Chavez was born, 1881, was about the year that railroad tracks had been laid through Laguna Pueblo land, and my maternal great-grandfather was sent by train across the country to a boarding school run by the federal government. I imagine that Dennis Chavez, as a boy growing up in Los Chavez and Barelas, had a similar upbringing to my Laguna family because we are all New Mexicans. I got my start in education and in politics because of the civil rights movement, really. I didn't begin my college education until I was 28, and one of the reasons why I went to college at all was because I learned that Native Americans were the most underrepresented group in higher education, and I wanted to change that statistic. By the time I enrolled here at UNM School of Law, I had spent time at a graduate program in California, and UNM School of Law charged me out-of-state tuition, which added $18,000 onto my first year of law school. That experience encouraged me to work to get a bill passed in the New Mexico State Legislature that gave enrolled members of New Mexico Indian tribes in-state tuition, regardless of their residency. I argued, among other things, that Native Americans never lose their residency with their tribes. Senate Bill 482 passed the 2005 New Mexico State Legislature and was signed into law by Governor Richardson. But unfortunately, the new residency designation that I worked so hard to enable was not retroactive. And so yes, I'm still paying off my student loans. During my third year of law school, I met a law student who had been adopted out of her family as an infant and was an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. She was raised in Los Angeles. She came to UNM School of Law so that she could get in-state tuition. She had the opportunity to meet and spend time with her birth family during that time, which was a wonderful byproduct of the government working for the people. It showed me that small acts could make a real difference in people's lives, and even more so, that I could make a difference. I love that Senator Chavez, while a member of the New Mexico legislature, introduced legislation providing free textbooks to public school children. I believe that fighting for equity in education is one way we can ensure that our society sees civil rights as a North Star. Today I want to talk about how we as a country can work to make America a better place for everyone. As one of the first Native American women in Congress, after 233 years of Congress, and as the first Native American cabinet secretary, I have a stark first-person recognition that representation truly does matter. There were times in my tenure in the House of Representatives that I had to impart important pieces of our country's history because my fellow members of Congress did not know as much as they should about those things. More times than I could count, I would give the perspective of a Native woman to my colleagues because that perspective had never been at the decision-making table. I always say, how can you solve a problem if you don't know it exists? And it was clear that many of my former colleagues didn't understand the challenges Native women face because they never really thought to ask. And therefore, there had never been one in Congress before me and Sharice Davids. This doesn't always reflect malice, but it's an unknowing that can truly be remedied by having people at the decision-making table who have varied lived experiences. When tragedies strike, like Flint, Michigan water crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic, the disparities that exist in our country become crystal clear. But it should not have to take a tragedy to bring those things to light. We should be able to address the problems and make things right before tragedies occur, so that communities have the resources to address them instead of fighting for recognition. None of this could be more urgent than when we think about climate change. As I speak with you, families have been evacuated from wildfire zones. Storms have ravaged and are ravaging our coastal communities, and people struggling with homelessness and underserved communities face death caused by extreme weather. Every community faces the costs associated with the pain and heartache that those events bring, but everyone in this room knows that not every community has the resources to rebuild or even relocate when a climate event happens in their backyard. The Biden-Harris administration knows that many of the challenges that underserved and marginalized communities face did not pop out of thin air, but are a result of policies and laws that were intended to exclude them. I believe that environmental justice is the civil rights issue of our lifetime. It is part of the work so many of us committed to do when we decided to apply to law school, to ensure equal justice and access for all. But that cannot be realized until we understand the full history of our country that set in motion the policies and laws that got us here. We must unravel injustice thread by thread. To chart a path forward to build a better America, we have to know our own history. In fact, U.S. history began centuries before our country was even a thought in anyone's mind. I recognize that all of us have different interests. There are lawyers in this very room practicing different kinds of law or teaching different areas of the law. The same goes for just about any type of work that anyone does. We can't possibly know everything about everything. I would argue, however, that as Americans, we have a responsibility to know about our country's beginning, who lived here, and what was here before the first colonizers set foot on this continent. We must take it upon ourselves to learn from our past so that we go into the future with open eyes. We have a responsibility to learn the good and the bad. When I think about the history books our children learn from, much of the focus, as I remember it, is on the founding of our country, our founding fathers, our founding documents, our country's valiant victory in winning freedom from our original patriarchs. There may be a paragraph or a chapter or a project about Native people in 3rd grade, and it may only be about the indigenous communities in the part of the country where we happen to live. Part of my childhood was spent on the East Coast because of my father's Marine Corps career. It was there that I learned about the Pilgrims, the first Thanksgiving, and the 13 original colonies. But I didn't learn about the Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska who viewed salmon and whales, birds and bears as their relations, or the Native Hawaiians who were sea bears and navigators long before Europeans set foot in the Western Hemisphere. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, that the center of our history books is skewed to a certain perspective. In this way, we don't learn the root causes of many of the challenges that we face as a country. We can't work to make things right until and unless we know what it was we got wrong in the first place. I mentioned earlier that my great-grandfather was sent to boarding school after the railroad made its way to Laguna. His daughter, my grandmother, at 8 years old, was also stolen and sent to boarding school. A little closer in Santa Fe, but a 3-day trip by horse and wagon, which her dad made twice in the 5 years that she was there. I never really knew much about my family story until I worked on a creative writing project during my undergrad at UNM. Almost every weekend during the semester, I would travel to my grandma's house in Mesita, which is a small village on the Pueblo of Laguna, and I asked her to share stories with me about her life. As she ironed or cooked, she would think back, eager to help me understand how she retained her identity as a Pueblo woman in spite of all that she had seen and experienced. One day she shared with me that the priest came around to the houses collecting children to put them on the train and send them to Santa Fe. Couldn't even imagine how scared she must have felt. She spoke of the loneliness she endured while at St. Catherine's boarding school in Santa Fe. We wept together. Federal policies such as boarding school relocation and allotment era policies were all assimilation efforts, ultimately meant to take away land from Indian tribes and open it up to white settlement. In the process, decades of generational knowledge of the relationship with the land, which included a plethora of native languages, were lost. Thankfully, people like my grandparents worked against all odds to preserve cultures and traditions for me, and quite frankly, for all of us. Many different native languages saved democracy, not just for our country, but for the world. We know that Native veterans through history have played incredibly important roles in the U.S. military, as code talkers, but also as combat veterans, mechanics, nurses, and engineers. Even still, many Indigenous people, like me, do not speak our native languages fluently. This is an injustice that has ramifications far beyond our connection to our people and our history. To address it, we have to understand that the generational trauma caused by those policies have long-lasting impacts. This attempt to wipe out Native identity, language, and culture continues to manifest itself in the disparities that communities face, including long-standing intergenerational trauma, cycles of violence and abuse, disappearance, premature deaths because of pollution and inadequate health care, and additional undocumented physiological and psychological impacts. As secretary, I've had the opportunity to visit many Native communities to engage with them on how we can get our arms around these issues and move forward together and help make better lives for our children. One example in particular has stayed with me from a visit to Montana. Tribal leaders from around the state gathered to share stories of the issues that their communities were dealing with, from difficulties with public safety and the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis to challenges in addressing drug abuse, domestic violence, and unemployment issues. There was a recognition that many of these issues stem from a disconnection to the communities and ancestors because of the boarding schools. Decades after these federal policies, their impact and cycles of distress continue. It struck me during that conversation, as it has many other times while I've served in this role, this is the first time in history that a United States Cabinet Secretary comes to the table with this shared trauma. As I said earlier, representation matters. Many Indian boarding schools were maintained by the Interior Department, which I now lead. I believe that I and the Biden-Harris administration have an important responsibility to bring this trauma to light. Last year, I launched the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative to shed light on the assimilation policies of the past and the damage those abusive practices had on the innocent children who were sentenced to time in those schools. I also launched it because I believe that we recognize these cycles. Native people are at risk of repeating them. Part of the initiative includes an investigation into the historical policies of boarding schools and where graves may still exist. The first volume of that investigation was released a few months ago, with a second expected next year. I also launched The Road to Healing, a year-long tour across the country to provide Indigenous survivors of the federal Indian boarding school system and their descendants an opportunity to share their experiences. In the coming months, we'll also launch the creation of an oral history project to memorialize the stories we are hearing and ensure that they are available for generations to come. We hope that the opportunities for people to speak openly about their tortured past will help them to heal and will help our country to heal, because this burden, it's upon all of us. As we continue to uncover more trauma, so too we can identify policies like investing in the strengthening of native languages that can help undo some of the injustices of the past. This is an example of what it takes to address the root of the issues that communities face, rather than just addressing the surface symptoms. I mentioned that I believe environmental justice is the civil rights issue of our lifetime. It is rooted in an underlying history of legacy marginalization. My experience reflects Indigenous trauma, but there are communities across the country and represented in this room who have their own stories and histories that reflect a similar pattern. If we are to make progress on healing our wounds from the past, we also need to acknowledge the sins our country has committed against the environment. Everything is all connected. Many poor and rural communities and communities of color bear the impacts of climate change at disproportionate rates, and they often receive the least resources to manage those impacts. Everywhere we look, we not only see places where we can improve, but also places where we have fallen dreadfully short. I was in Alaska in April of this year, where rates of disappearing salmon, wildfires, warm temperatures, and melting ice are accelerating at alarming rates. Tribal nations, such as the Quinault Nation in Washington State, are now planning to move their traditional village inland to escape rising seawaters. Here in New Mexico, we have the largest methane cloud in the world just hovering above our state, spreading toxic pollution into the lungs of our children. My pueblo of Laguna was home to the largest open-pit uranium mine in the world for 30 years, and lawsuits are still being fought in the name of environmental justice. If we go back and learn more about our history, we'll find that the legacy of environmental injustice goes back much further. And just like the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, we must commit the time and the resources to uncover how the policies of the past can inform the laws of the future. When I think about the Europeans first setting foot on this continent and the vast and diverse natural resources they must have encountered, it astounds me to think that instead of asking the indigenous people how they cared for that beautiful bounty, for the most part, they really set out to exploit and destroy it. They believed that our natural resources would not run out. The furs, the whales, the fish, the forests were all there for them to take at will, with no regard for how they would repay the earth for its generosity. I think often about passenger pigeons, described by Potawatomi Chief Simon Pokagon in the mid-1800s. He said, "It was proverbial with our father that if the Great Spirit in his wisdom could have created a more elegant bird in plumage, form, and movement, he never did. I have seen them move in one unbroken column for hours across the sky like some great river. I have stood by the grandest of waterfalls of America and regarded the descending torrents in wonder and astonishment, yet never have my astonishment, wonder, and admiration been so stirred as when I have witnessed these birds drop from their course like meteors from heaven." According to the Audubon Society, there were an estimated 3 billion passenger pigeons in the 1900s, but by 1914, the last one, named Martha, died in the Cincinnati Zoo, extinct because of commercial exploitation of pigeon meat on a massive scale and loss of habitat. 3 billion birds extinct. That extinction had a ripple effect throughout ecosystems in North America and could explain the drastic uptick of biodiversity loss, because without their large and dense flocks, forest regeneration cycles were disturbed. Everything is connected. Also take the Great Plains, for instance. Before large numbers of pioneers began populating the western half of the United States in furtherance of manifest destiny, the Great Plains had been home to massive herds of bison. I had a professor in graduate school who stated that if you could have seen the earth from the moon at that time, you could also have seen the great mass of bison upon it. The herds of bison would have appeared as a big black swath upon the planet. Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, describes the system of bison and the grasses they graze on as well balanced, because the herds use the grasses respectfully. She stated that free-range bison graze and move on, not returning to the same place for many months. Thus, a physiological change occurred called compensatory growth, in which the plant compensates for the loss of foliage by quickly growing more, protecting the integrity of the Great Plains for many centuries. Bison saliva is also thought to contain an enzyme that is complementary to growing grass, and of course, we can't forget about the fertilizer. It was a two-way beneficial relationship between the grass and the bison for millennia. Enter the Homestead Act of 1862, the enlarged Homestead Act of 1909, because the 1862 one just wasn't big enough. Pioneers, cattle, fences, Buffalo Bill Cody, and folks like him with a thirst for blood, not just of the bison, but also of the Indians who relied upon the bisons for sustenance. The idea was If they killed all the bison, the Indians would also die, and the Great Plains would soon be dotted only with cattle and, well, non-Indian people. My professor said that when the bison were killed off, weather patterns in California also changed. I think they call that climate change. Enter wheat farmers and hungry farm supply company owners who together set about plowing up the Great Plains to plant wheat, thus stopping short that beneficial relationship. The rains eventually stopped, the price of wheat fell through the floor, and hard times ensued. Timothy Egan called it the worst hard time in his book about the Dust Bowl. Dirt from Clayton, New Mexico blew all the way to Washington, D.C., and that was the deciding factor for President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Congress to recognize this man-made ecological disaster and to work to remedy it. The word man-made is my own, and it's the truth. In the hindsight that 92 years offers, it's easy to now say that Native Americans knew how to care for the Great Plains if anyone had thought to ask. It's also clear that the practice of taking more from the earth than you need, and with no regard to the damage that is caused, is no way to manage our resources. Additionally, marginalized communities and living things that have no voice in our policymaking disproportionately bear the burdens of that harmful approach. Earlier this year, I was part of a press call with leaders from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where I had to announce that we were removing 23 species from the endangered species list, not because the scientists, biologists, and ecologists were able to ensure their survival, but because they became extinct. In this era of the climate crisis, not unlike the Dust Bowl or the near extinction of the bison, our earth beckons us to act, and not just some of us, but all of us. Nothing will ever bring back the glory and the purpose of the Great Plains, but it is to all of our benefit to ensure that tribal nations have a voice in how their ancestral homelands are being stewarded. When I'm traveling, I often mention to the staff at the parks or refuges that I visit that they are the stewards of those lands, and it is incumbent on them to seek out the ways in which the original stewards of those lands cared for it before them. The practice of only taking what you need from the earth and respecting the balance of nature can help us address environmental injustice. So too can bringing voices back to the table that reflect the history of the land. Nurturing co-stewardship opportunities with American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and members of the Native Hawaiian community who have generational knowledge is a priority for me and for this administration. It's an opportunity to promote equity and inclusion and to return a sense of justice to some of these lands. I am grateful that communities whose ancestral lands were often stolen and desecrated see the value in working with us to make things right for future generations. Bears Ears National Monument, the living landscape that is the ancestral homeland of the Pueblo people, carries the deep history of many tribes in the Southwest. A favorite site of looters who want to make a buck off the graves of my ancestors, it's a place that deserves to be protected. On the day when President Biden signed the proclamation to restore its boundaries as a national monument, I stated that he was protecting it for every child of the world. I can't tell you what it meant to stand behind the President of the United States as he signed that proclamation, because representation matters. Yes, Bears Ears is my ancestral homeland, but it's also a cultural heritage and sacred space that belongs to every single American. We all stand to gain by visiting a place of reverence so that our children will understand their obligation as Americans. Sacred places feed all of our souls. In addition to co-stewardship policies are the opportunities to return lands to tribes. Earlier this year, I celebrated the return of the National Bison Range to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, It meant a lot to those communities to see signs at the range in their tribe's native language. I was honored to hear the singers summon the buffalo with their traditional songs. Likewise, the Dorshak Fish Hatchery in Idaho is now under the management of the Nez Perce tribe. After careful work to officially transfer that responsibility, the tribe is eagerly helping young Native students to obtain their degrees in fish hatchery management from the local community college, and tribal leadership is sharing their knowledge with interior staff. This administration has ushered in a new era for marginalized communities and a commitment to strengthen tribal sovereignty. We are demonstrating with actions our respect for Indigenous knowledge as we carve a path toward environmental justice. As I mentioned, Indigenous communities are not the only people who bear the burdens of injustice at disproportionate rates. When I had the profound opportunity to travel to Mississippi this year, I visited some of the sites that played a role in the Emmett Till's horrific and gruesome death. We also visited the courthouse where Emmett Till's murderers were acquitted. During a community discussion, a young woman stated that she had grown up in that very county and until recently had never even heard about Emmett Till or the story of his murder at school. His story can tell us a lot about the injustice that still has impacts today. A recent national report found that Black children ages 5 to 19 are 5.5 times more likely to drown than white children. And according to the USA Swimming Foundation, about 70% of Black children and 60% of Latino children don't know how to swim. And why don't they know how to swim? It goes back to a history of exclusion, right? From being barred from city and public pools, from a lack of access to beaches and open water, from the growing disparities between people who have the time and means to pay for swimming lessons or water sports and those who do not. From growing up in communities where experiencing the outdoors has felt out of reach because parents lack the resources for transportation or even admission costs. There is an intergenerational trauma from this legacy of disparity that still leads to higher rates of drowning among certain communities. If Black and Latino children don't know how to swim or are afraid of the water, how will they be our next generation of water stewards? I can't get those statistics out of my head. I can't stop thinking about how powerless I felt as a single parent, relying on public assistance and the grace and charity of others to make sure that my child was not left behind, or worse, was not put in danger. This is how environmental justice surfaces, from histories of injustice and exclusion that result in children not knowing how to swim, even if they grow up near large bodies of water. At Interior, it is our obligation to tell America's story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I believe it is my duty to use my platform to tell these stories. We're moving forward by not only adjusting course, but also by acknowledging that we have an obligation to future generations to make things right. Representation matters. Black leadership has made our country look at itself in the mirror and strive to do better. I had the distinct honor of serving in Congress with John Lewis, God rest his soul, and every day I saw him, I was reminded of why I did the work that I did. John Lewis dedicated his life to the progress of the civil rights movement. He rang the alarm on injustice before and while serving in Congress. He made sure policymakers knew problems existed so that they could solve them, and then rolled up his sleeves to solve them together. We all know that a government doesn't act alone or run itself. A government by the people and for the people is only as good as those who step up to lead. John Lewis was the face of the civil rights movement for decades, and he, like Senator Dennis Chavez, worked to make things right. Our country works better when those in decision-making positions look like America. Dennis Chavez knew what it was like to be poor, to come from a rural community. Among many accomplishments, he worked to pass the Employment Practices Commission Bill in 1944, which sought to end racial discrimination in the workplace and which is often seen as a precursor to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. His stance on equal employment was thus: if the Constitution is worth anything, if the Declaration of Independence is worth anything, if the boys who died on the field of battle did not die in vain, fair employment practices are correct and necessary. He saw the root of the matter, raised the issue with his colleagues, and found solutions. In the work I do every day, oftentimes it is to undo some of the things related to the mistakes of the past. I also have the profound opportunity to be present when good things come to fruition because of the work that our team has accomplished. For example, recently, we celebrated the delisting of the snail darter from the endangered species list. The snail darter, or Persina tenasi, and I apologize if I mispronounce that, is a small ray-finned freshwater fish native to the waters of the Tennessee River. Yes, these are things you become aware of when you work at the Department of the Interior. So don't feel bad if you didn't know what the snail darter was before you came here tonight. The snail darter has historical significance. It was the subject of the 1978 U.S. Supreme Court case Tennessee Valley Authority versus Hill. The Supreme Court addressed whether the 3-inch long fish, which had been listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act, could prevent the completion of the Tellico Dam on the Little Tennessee River. This case was the first one to test the ESA. The Supreme Court ruled that the protective provisions of the ESA trumped the economic concerns that the dam would bring. The snail darter was given a chance by the Supreme Court, and the dedicated staff of professionals at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service nurtured the snail darter population back to health. A happy ending so far. Yes, you could have gone. By protecting even the smallest creatures, we show who we are as a country, that we care about our environment and we understand that everything is connected. This philosophy is essential to our work at the department. When we demonstrate care for our environment, we invest in the people, wildlife, and communities who rely upon it to survive. Clean air and water should be a right for every community in this country, period. But it is not. Yes. But it isn't yet. Not quite yet. We still have a ways to go. Millions of Americans across the country live within just 1 mile of an abandoned coal mine or orphaned oil and gas well. I'm sorry, there's more bad news. But there's good news at the end, so just keep listening. These legacy pollution sites are environmental hazards and jeopardize public health and safety by contaminating groundwater, emitting noxious gases like methane, littering the landscape with rusted and dangerous equipment, creating flooding and sinkhole risks, and harming wildlife. For far too long, a lack of resources was blamed for why these hazards continued to pollute communities, often marginalized communities. But that changed with the President's bipartisan infrastructure law. The law provides a historic $16 billion, that's billion with a B, investment that will go directly to plugging orphaned wells and reclaiming abandoned mine lands. These resources will help communities eliminate dangerous conditions and pollution caused by past extraction activities. Projects to cap orphaned oil and gas wells, close dangerous mine shafts, improve water drainage, and restore water supplies damaged by mining will create good-paying jobs to strengthen local economies. We're doing this on federal land, state, and tribal lands across the country in more than 20 states. And with, okay, you can clap for me. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, we're taking that work a step further. New funding will provide for fence line monitoring near industrial facilities, air quality sensors in disadvantaged communities, new and upgraded multi-pollutant monitoring sites, and monitoring and mitigation of methane and wood heater emissions. All of this as we usher in a clean energy transition that relies on the Earth's resources, wind, solar, geothermal, as we transition away from our country's dependence on oil and gas development and extractive industries that have contributed to the legacy pollution these new laws aim to address. Good policy comes from reflecting on the trauma of the past as we consider the consequences for the future. These are all programs and services designed to put our country on solid footing to tackle the climate crisis, but also to make things right with the communities who have been ignored through history. The idea that the first colonists had when they set foot on this continent, that nothing would ever run out, was obviously very wrong. Our time to save the earth is now. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. After all I have talked about this evening, the transfers of land, the policies and legislation that we implement, and the people that we fight for, you must all be thinking that we have a lot of lawyers at the DOI, and we do. The answer is absolutely yes, and every one of them is passionate about the work they do for our country, and I am so grateful every day to work alongside them. I recognize that there are many lawyers here, and that generally you're working to provide legal advice and counsel, research, and gather information or evidence. You might be writing legal documents for divorces, wills, contracts, real estate transactions. Maybe you're prosecuting or defending people accused of crimes in court, or helping folks to gain their citizenship. Or maybe you're defending a client like the snail darter. Whatever you do, I hope you're doing it with the passion and an eye toward equal justice. The time for anything else should be left to the history books. I know that this lecture may not be a traditional CLE, but I hope that my perspective may be of some help to you in the work that you do. I appreciate the opportunity to share my lived experience with all of you. If you take nothing else away from tonight, I offer the following points of emphasis. 1, environmental injustice has roots in our history that stem all the way back to colonization, and we must know our full history, the good and the bad, in order to move justice forward. 2, when our leadership looks like America, our country is better equipped to know about the challenges different communities face, and then it can address them. 3, we need to look at environmental justice as a civil rights issue because many of the injustice that marginalized communities face come from a legacy of oppression and exclusion. And last but not least, the time to act is now. When we know the origins of the laws we study and the history of our country, we can think more clearly about how we can better serve all people. I'm feeling so grateful that Senator Dennis Chavez has brought us together this evening. His lasting mark on the progress that our country has made in the realm of civil rights is undeniable, and his mission of standing up for underrepresented communities resides with all of us. How we choose to approach that mission, of course, is up to us. Working to ensure that representation matters in our work, bringing our history to light, and deciding to fight for a more just future can be our promise to channel the good that our senator brought to our state and to our entire country. I thank you for being here and giving me the opportunity to be here with you all. I thank you for caring enough about making our country a better place that you would subject yourself to all it takes, not only just to become a lawyer, but to stay one, right? And of course, I'm so happy that you were here to honor the legacy of Senator Dennis Chavez. I am reminded today of the reason why I decided to go to law school at all, and that was because I wanted to help people. I hope I am living that out every day and hope that you do the same. And I think we're taking some questions now. So thank you all so much. I think you go to the microphone so everyone can hear the question.
Madam Secretary, I drive through the Bears Ears several times a year, but I've never seen a sign. Where was that sign?
It's new.
It's
a
new.
new sign. You'll have to go back.
Okay. Do you know where it is exactly or not?
One of my staff can likely help you, or we'll follow up
Where is it?
to let you know exactly where that sign is. But I think there's several signs throughout the area now.
Good. I'm glad people finally know where it is and
Yes.
what it is. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, it's good to meet you, and this is my first time ever, so I hope I use my language the right way to everybody. It's been a long time since I went to school, and it's good to be here, and I'm trying to take part. I have questions for my daughters, my two daughters, Letitia and Vanessa George, and my granddaughters, Haley and three granddaughters, Haley, Zoe, and Chloe, and my unborn Letitia's son. They were found on Santa Ana Pueblo, and I would like to ask for your help to see what you can do to help us find some ways to get justice for them. It's been since 2017. And because of the jurisdictions that they have on Santa Ana Pueblo and a lot. Yeah, and the FBI and the police department that were helping them. But the case was closed since then. So I need your help, and our families and everybody in America and also all over the world, they would like to know whatever happened to the case on my girls and my granddaughters and my unborn grandson.
Well, first of all, I am just so sorry for your terrible loss, and I will if you can get in contact with one of my staff members, she can give you a card, and at least you'll be able to know how to write us a letter so that we know what it is you would like us to do. Of course, we care deeply about these issues. You might know that we started the Missing and Murdered Unit, and we have 17 new investigators in each one of the BIA regions to make sure that they're handling those cases. We recognize that some cases are cold, and people need to know where their loved ones are, what happened to them, and so I appreciate knowing that. And Heidi is happy to give you her business card so that you can send us an email. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for your leadership. My name is Gail Evans, and I am a member of the Greater Chaco Coalition, which is an indigenous-led coalition
led by people who live in the tri-chapter area of the Eastern Agency of the Navajo Nation. And so thank you for initiating the Honoring Chaco initiative, which I understand the goal of is to protect the greater Chaco landscape and not just the land around the monument. And I want to ask you, I mean, the biggest thing impacting the landscape right now is the ongoing oil and gas extraction and the ongoing leasing in the greater Chaco landscape. And I'm asking if you would consider a pause on leasing while the Honoring Chaco initiative is being developed, because there will be no land left to honor if the leasing isn't paused.
I appreciate that question. Of course, I'm not going to answer it here. And again, we really appreciate feedback. It's my understanding right now that there's a process to everything, right? We put the public comment out, the public comment period, and I know my staff is diligently working on those public comments. I thank you for bringing that to my attention. I suspect that a lot of public comments will have that very request in there. They're all being assessed, and as soon as there's something to announce, we will absolutely announce it. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Banshee Randall Shorty. I am Zachariah Shorty's mom. I am also his voice. I'm from San Juan County, Farmington, New Mexico, Kirtland. Zachariah went missing from Farmington from the Journey Inn and was found a few days later on the Navajo Reservation in Inanzad. And you didn't mention anything about the missing and murdered unit that you've started, during this time. And, that saddens me because that is why you're here also. And, I've also met with the missing and murdered unit. They came out to my house and they gave me their time. They spoke with me, listened to Zach's story. They went out to the location he was found. They looked through pictures, and I was able to tell them about his life. It's been 2 years now, and like I said, I've gotten in contact with the missing and murdered unit, and my problem is the jurisdiction unit. What can you do for us? There are many families here. There's families outside, and I'm hoping that you come out to address them. But we want answers. We want, this jurisdiction lifted so that the BIA unit can come in and help the FBI. That's my problem with my son's case. And I am borderline town. I need answers. I don't want my son's case closed. There's many families here that are crying out to you for help. We don't know where to go.
Thank you for coming here. Thank you for, I'm so sorry for your loss. And again, it would help us if we could get your contact information, or you can get in contact with us.
I've done
It's
that.
it's hard for me to know about the case in particular. However, all the cases are important to us, and if you would like to have a card from one of my staff, you could follow up with us.
Okay, so that's all you have for us, is that?
That's all I have at the moment, because I don't have specific details. I don't have the case in front of me. I haven't spoken to, particularly spoken to the missing and murdered unit investigator that you spoke with. I don't have that kind of information in front of me right
Sean
now.
Garnanez, and my son is Zachariah Shorty.
I'm very
you.
sorry for your loss, and thank you for
Thank you.
bringing this to my attention. Yes, sir?
Thank you, Secretary Haaland, for a wonderful talk. In the course of it, you mentioned clean water. As you're well aware, the West is becoming very water conscious. And in many countries of the world right now, water is no longer free people are paying in their houses for economically sold water. And I wonder, is there a federal consciousness about this? And will there be a federal undertaking to guarantee free water to the citizens of America?
I wish I could answer that question. I couldn't tell you if there are people who are talking about it right now. I know that our Bureau of Reclamation and our Assistant Secretary for Water and Science and a plethora of other people at the department are diligently working on the drought crisis here in the West. So we know that it's going to take every single one of us to find solutions to those issues, because climate change, quite frankly, is not going away. I know that a lot of other countries are dealing with the same crises, and I believe that folks are, I mean, we're talking about that, right? There are summits and conferences and all of this on climate change, and I know that that is the #1 issue of our lifetime. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I'll talk with my staff about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Leela Mailman, and I'm also going to bring up questions about the MMIW again. And I was wondering, this is my daughter. From the time she was born to the last day I got to see her. And I've had no help from the police department in Farmington. Her case was thrown from case to case. Nobody seemed to have taken this seriously. But this is my child. And you talked about family. You talked about surroundings, what meant most to you. We shouldn't have to go by statistics. This is reality. And there are a lot of people out there that are going through the same reality. And all we need is a little help, maybe with the police department, more training. You got the FBI. A lot of them give us attitude. They judge all these that are missing, all those that are murdered. Every one of us have had a pass. You've had a pass. I've had a pass. I just wonder, what else are you going to do for these Native Americans that are missing? Because it shouldn't have to be like this. When I started out in 2014, we had a small table. Now we got 2 tables put together, and it's not getting any better. And in other Native places, it's worse. I mean, like that little Frank, he got butchered. He was only 4 years old. 4 years old. Put yourself in our shoes with these children. We don't want them to be judged. We don't judge you. We don't judge anybody. So like I said, we all have a past and we just need help. I think this has gone long enough, and it's getting worse. Maybe the police department from Farmington, the reservation, needs more training, better facilities, instead of shipping evidence to Albuquerque, to Phoenix, and they get lost, and God knows who's all touching them. So we can't get a perfect case.
Ma'am, I'm so sorry for your loss. I truly am.
I understand, but I need understanding. I don't need sympathy, I need understanding. And some kind of help for everybody.
Thank you.
Because
Thank you.
I find my daughter, I'm not going to stop.
When I first, even before I was in Congress,
Yes.
missing and murdered Indigenous people, it was not talked about by a lot of anyone. I'd go to rallies for missing and murdered Indigenous people here in Albuquerque, and there'd be like 4 people who would show up. And that was one of the issues that I felt was important for me to take to Congress. So one of the bills that I was able to get passed while I was a member of Congress, the Not Invisible Act, it created a commission to work on this issue. The commission has tribal leaders, law enforcement. It has survivors who are part of the commission who can inform us how we should go about. Missing and murdered Indigenous people is an issue that's happened since colonization, since the first colonists got to this country. It's not an issue that's been over the past couple of generations. It's a 500-year-old issue, and it will take more than one law or two laws, or to your point, 17 new investigators in Indian country to solve the issue. I want you to know that we're dedicated to it. And as soon as we have information that we can share, I will absolutely share it with you. But I want you to know that we're trying, we're working as hard as we can. This is an issue that's a priority for the department, and I do understand. I'm happy that I was able to bring it to the mainstream where people are actually talking about it and caring about it. So we'll continue our work. Again, Heidi's happy to give you her card, and if you would like to reach out to us at the department, we would welcome your email or letter or whatever you would like to send. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for giving us the time to speak.
And we have time for just one more question.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland. It's an absolute honor for you to be here and to bring such important stories to light, and an honor to have a fellow UNM alumni who's going forward and telling stories of Native people and issues in New Mexico.
Thank you.
One thing that I know is important to Senator Chavez, also to you, is education, and education in the state of New Mexico, and specifically even on the reservation. As I'm sure everyone here knows, New Mexico vies for last place in education continuously, and a lot of issues are on the reservation. And the inability to get teachers to teach on the reservation. One of the things we're working on is a lot of the teachers on the reservation come from the Philippines and other countries on J1 waivers, where they have to go back to their home country for the home residency requirement. And the Department of Interior has the power to be an interested government agency that can give them waivers in order to stay and continue teaching on the reservation and not have that disruption. And so one request, and we've brought it up to the department as well, would be to consider how to solve some of the education issues on the reservation in New Mexico as a whole, through the Department of Interior granting waivers for teachers to be able to continue teaching in the state of New Mexico and reservations throughout the U.S.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could you please all join me one more time in thanking Secretary Haaland? We just have one more thing. If you'd please take your seats. At this time, I'd like to ask Dennis Tristani, Jorge Tristani, and Gloria Tristani to the stage for a special presentation.
Madam Secretary, and I love saying Madam Secretary. On behalf of my brothers, myself, my cousin Sissy Coy, the other grandchild who could not be here, the Tristani and Chavez family, all our friends, all New Mexico and all of the United States, thank you for being here, for giving a compelling talk, such an important speech, a call to arms on our environment, I'm a mother and grandmother, and I cry about what we're leaving our children and grandchildren. So we have to change that now. So I'm not surprised to know that you're making that a number one priority in Interior. But I also want to thank you, and this relates to my grandfather, and I know my brothers will understand that your message about representation matters is absolutely true. We cannot know what we need to do, what we need to fix, what we need to make right without having people at the table and at those very important tables. And lastly, I've got to say this, but when I met you earlier today, I said, you're the star in the cabinet. I mean, I'm prejudiced. And you have shown that you are, and now we want to present something very special to you as a thank you. And let me add, it has a very special message to you in the back.
I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone for coming. It was a really special evening, and special thanks to the Tristani and Chavez families, to Secretary Deb Haaland, and thank you all for being here. Good night. Thank you.